Hello, everyone. Welcome to the State of Generative AI today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I can already see some of the comments are coming in. My name is Mariia. I'm head of business development at the startup Wise Guys. And today we're speaking to Ian. Hello, welcome. How are you today?
I'm great, Mariia. Good to see you again. It's been a while since I saw you in Lisbon.
Yes, I know. I cannot wait. You know, a couple of our wiselings have been already telling me that they cannot wait for this stream. They have so many questions about what do we wait from this amazing technology and how do we use it in B2B. Let me just make a couple of announcements. So right now we're currently looking for the startups in both cybersecurity field and B2B SaaS. So if you're one of those founders, please do check out our website and see if any of our programs is suitable. Plus to this, next week already, we're launching our applications for the next B2B SaaS Africa Accelerator. So make sure you check it out if that's applicable. And plus to it, to all the audiences that are somehow near, so either investors or entrepreneurs, do go explore our website. As you can see, we have the brand new look. I love it. And make sure that you check what are the open things we're working on. So now, Ian, this is the second edition of the State of, and then I come up with some topic I want to talk about. So today we're going to talk about generative AI. But before I start asking you questions about this, I would love you to maybe give us a little bit of the background. What have you been working on? What are you working on right now? What are you building? What are the challenges you're trying to solve?
Absolutely. So Signal and Cypher is essentially a consulting and production house that focuses on helping companies navigate kind of the new emerging technology landscape. So we've been focusing on AI, immersive tech for several years now. And over the past several years, I and my team have been experimenting with different forms of generative AI. Back in 2020, we were working with different algorithms that would take a two-dimensional photo and create a 3D model of you. That created like lo-fi game art style avatars, all the way to today where we're working with photorealistic representations of personal self. We're also using AI for art generation, world building, copy, and all the other things you're probably seeing from things like ChatGPT that I'm assuming everyone on here has at least heard about, if not experimented with. And what we're seeing is the next wave is the incorporation across the enterprise, but also stacking a lot of these different technologies. So we're experimenting a lot with more of the visual and immersive side right now, but what we're also seeing is how much impact this is going to have across B2B and the enterprise space. It's come a long way in a short period of time. Back in 2016, we saw the first variation of generative AI with the generation of 32 by 32 pixel frames that were barely even legible. And now we have things that are incredibly ornate and indistinguishable from human production, all the way to convincing text and prose. So it's been a wild ride over the last couple of years, especially the last 6 months.
100%. Could you tell us a little bit, what were your first tests? So where did you start with all your journey, and where, so to which extremes are you going right now playing with it?
So our first test, as I mentioned earlier, was more in the 3D space of bringing avatars to life. We were trying to figure out how we could move more and more into immersive production. One division of our company is a virtual production house. So we're doing a lot of work in Unreal Engine. We're producing both film and video inside of virtual environments. Started off actually as a real estate videography business that my partner started, and that moved into architectural visualization. And we realized, you're kind of moving in the direction of creating virtual worlds because you're doing architectural visualizations. And I came in and brought a lot of expertise around virtual production and 3D animation and 3D design. And we combined teams to create, a larger set of virtual production and world building services. And within that space, there was a lot that was emerging. Most of it was still manual, but we saw a couple of tools here and there. Well, you could make this one small piece of that production line a little bit easier and a little bit faster. And it was a little bit haphazard to start with. Like we designed some things. They would look a little bit like what you were looking for. It's kind of like when you make a copy of a copy, it's not very good, but it's recognizable as what you were going for. So we would experiment with these things and we'd see how fast they were moving and realize this might not be what we're looking for like a high resolution or high fidelity product, but it's moving so fast, we know it's going to get there. And our philosophy has always been start experimenting now so you can understand the contours of these technologies. Because as my favorite YouTube channel, 2 Minute Paper says, just imagine where we're going to be 2 papers down the line. Because that 2 papers is 3 to 6 months now, not 2 to 3 years. And the advancement of the state of AI is moving so fast. If you start now, by the time you really understand it, the capability will have gotten so good, what you're actually looking for might even be possible. So that's how we got started. Experiments that we're running today are everything from really photorealistic avatars. I have an avatar that I worked with Hour One to produce that is incredibly photorealistic. You cannot tell it's not me. The only reason you would be able to tell it's not me presenting the news for Defiance Media is it doesn't sound like me. It's actually an avatar that is, I went out to go film myself for this in New York. I spent 2 hours reading a script. The algorithm learned how my body moves when I talk and how my face moves when I say certain things. And then I can select from any mode of 120 different voice actors to present my content. Well, all I have to do is write the script, put the content in to render, and it puts an image of me on a 3-dimensional set. It's very, very high production value, looks great, and it's a 10th the time of what it would typically take for me to produce something like that. So that's the beauty of these technologies, is the shortening of time from idea to execution is huge. And it's flipping that equation where ideas are worthless and execution is everything to ideas are becoming a really important currency and execution is easier. I won't say it's nothing, but it's a lot easier.
Before I go into the next question, I would like to address the audience and say that, guys, we are seeing the comments, and this is my call to action. Start asking your questions to Ian. I will make sure to select some and bring them to all of you for us to discuss those topics. So I'm hoping you will be active in the comments area. Ian, I wanted to ask about the position that you have, the synthetic host of the Future Report. I have actually watched one of the episodes, but could you bring the audience up to speed and tell us about the process and also the why? So why did you create that sort of YouTube channel and series?
Absolutely. So I work with a company called Defiance Media, which is a 24-hour news broadcast platform that is essentially, they call themselves the center of decentralized culture. You could kind of say like the Vice News for crypto and for Web3 and new technologies. And they had approached me and Hour One about working with a synthetic host to help create some new programming, because they're very future forward. They're focused on the new and emerging tech. And they said, well, this kind of makes sense. This whole area of technology is growing so rapidly. Why don't we experiment here? And they approached me and Hour One about doing a segment. And I said, this is an amazing opportunity. But I'll back up about why I even did the avatar in the first place. I had been, I knew about Hour One for a while. Hour One is one of a few different synthetic avatar generation platforms. There's Synthesia, there's a few others. Hour One is the one that I work with, and I absolutely love them. They have an incredible product and an amazing team. And about a year and a half ago, I was working with Natalie Mombio, who is the head of strategy over there. And she said, you know, we'd like to actually make an avatar of you and put you on our platform and talk about, you know, rights and management. I said, well, that's really interesting. I'm absolutely in, but let me think about the implications first. And because you're making a synthetic representation of yourself, and that can then be used in all manner of different contexts. And with a platform like Hour One, they manage those rights for you. So I felt safe moving into a space like this where a platform that I was signing up for, I had control over who used my likeness and how. And that was built into my contract. And that's something that's not really the case with a lot of other applications. There's actually an app that just got shown on Facebook with 120 different ad units last week, about deepfakes with really suggestive imagery. So we're in a space which is very fraught with different perils. But for me, the reason I went into it is I have a style of approach. I call it gonzo futurism. It's a takeoff the phrase gonzo journalism, about throwing yourself into an environment and a context that which you wish to study and report on. And for me, one of the most important things about studying the future is it's impossible to do it from an armchair. You can't just say, you know what, based on my previous experience, the future is going to look like this. It never looks like that. It's really hard to predict the future, and some of the smartest people in the world get it incredibly wrong all the time. To me, being a futurist isn't about predicting the future. It's about predicting possibilities, probable, plausible, and possible futures, so that you start to understand the patterns of how the future is going to unfold. So when they start to happen, you can see, this pattern looks familiar. Here's how I've approached that and thought about that in the past. Here's how I can be adaptable to it. So sometimes people say, well, you're a futurist, predict the future for me. It's like, not the point. But for me, and getting into the avatar side of things, I wanted to know what are going to be some of the benefits and some of the trials and tribulations of being an avatar and producing content as an avatar. And it's been a really amazing experience. The safety of having the ability to control who uses my avatar for what and how has been amazing. I also am the one that writes the script. So for this content, I do a 2-minute show every week called The Future Report, which is then put into their daily defiance. And that is a 2-minute segment on something that's either happened that week, and I think will have implications for the long term, or a topic that I'm really interested, that is kind of bubbling to the top of conversations. And I talk about where that's going, what are some of the elements that are driving that conversation, and kind of leave that for people to start commenting on. So it's 2 minutes where you see a synthetic version of me, speaks very professionally the entire time, doesn't sound like me. And then there's B-roll, like video, and other content that shows what I'm talking about. So it's very interactive. It uses a 3-dimensional set. So it's a combination of synthetic media and some virtual production in After Effects and 3-dimensional design. So be having it done in a 3D program, different camera movements. It looks like I'm in an actual news studio, but I sometimes write the script in my pajamas. Don't have to get in front of the camera, get the lighting going, and get the makeup on.
The work from home is getting to the next level, huh? Even in the media hosting, why not? So did I get it correct that the whole episode, so the whole thing is just generated by different AIs, or do you still have the final cut of it and editing?
So the actual bit is generated and rendered. So what I'll do is I'll choose different camera movements that I want. So I'll be able to choose a frame. So for example, right now I'm in kind of like a medium shot frame, and I can choose a wide shot or a close up and a camera swing. They're all pre-programmed. I'll write the script. The interface looks a little bit like the one I have now, where it's us in the center, and then I can see the chat on the right side. That's where I would enter my text and my content for my video and photos. And then once I'm done, I hit render, and about 15 minutes later, I have a full video that looks incredibly immersive.
So do you think this is the future of media?
I think it's a future of media. I think that there's a lot that's going to be happening here. I think more and more people will probably use these tools as the ability to write scripts here becomes easier. They've integrated generative AI for text generation. So generating text, modifying text, shortening, lengthening, changing tone, makes it really easy to get in and get started. And I do think that we're going in a direction where the need to get in front of a camera and have a $10,000 set of gear to start a YouTube channel, those days are over. I don't think it's kind of like saying digital killed paper. It didn't, but it became the dominant form of communication. And I think that we're moving in a direction where this is going to take up more and more of the way we do things.
True. And yeah, the setting is going to change a lot. The resources you need to produce more exclusive and higher performing and looking content is going to change. Can we touch upon different formats and how generative AI is interacting with them? So you can work with text, you can work with images, video. deep fake type of area. And then also you can interact with 3D. What have been the biggest, let's say, innovations or breakthroughs that you have seen in those formats, and where do you think it's going?
That's a great question. Well, I'll start with what I think is the most breakthrough moment in generative AI in general, and that was the open sourcing of Stable Diffusion. Most people know DALL-E and they know OpenAI ChatGPT, but the moment that Stable Diffusion said, we're open sourcing this, and this is for all of you to figure out what to do with, was a watershed moment for humanity. And I don't say that lightly, because what it did is it changed the playing field of AI is just for the big guys, and that the Microsofts and the Googles of the world get to have this toy and you get to wait in line. That brings all manner of challenges and exciting opportunities. There's a whole lot we have to figure out. Like, the issue that most people are worried about is, what are the machines going to do to my job and my life? The real question that we need to be asking ourselves is, how are we going to behave around the machines? These machines are not sentient. They don't have minds of their own, yet we treat them like they do. So there's a lot to talk about there. And maybe we can put a pin in that and come back to that in a little bit. But that was huge. So image generation became like the real first element of generative AI and synthetic AI that people started to gravitate to and experiment with firsthand. And then ChatGPT came along and just exploded. I guarantee if anyone's on this panel and is watching, they know what generative AI is. Therefore, they have probably used ChatGPT. I'm sure you've seen this and seen how mind-blowing it can be, and also how trivial some of the responses can be depending on what kind of prompt you give it. But the biggest breakthroughs, I think, are the scale of this. I mean, that's really what gives it its power. It's the scale of the models. But the fact that it's now happening in so many different media. There's every single element of a media brand or media production has been impacted by synthetic media and generative AI, whether it's voice, sound, music, audio in general, generating single images, generating video, to where we're getting now like really super stylized video with things like ControlNet, where we now have structure and balance built into a lot of this image generation. What kind of started off was it was a novelty. It was, look at this cool thing that machines can generate, and it was impressive. But now that novelty is worn off, and it's like, okay, I've got an individual image that you can check out that's very cool. What do you do with that? What's happening is the generative space is evolving to the point where it's not just about an individual output, but it's about having that individual output, let's say that individual image that you're talking about, being an input for a greater product. And that's what I think is one of the biggest advances in generative AI in the last couple of months, is the ability to say, I'm not just going to generate one image now. I'm going to use that image to throw it in Photoshop and use ControlNet, and then I can manipulate any part of the image I want to with incredible precision and control directed by me, where I am not dependent upon the algorithm to generate just anything and I have to deal with it. So it was kind of like pulling a slot machine when you started with Midjourney or with any of the other generative art platforms. Now I can use some of the more advanced algorithms to, again, throw it in Photoshop. Actually, I have a plugin that allows me to access Stable Diffusion from Photoshop. I can generate the image. I can select that, throw it into a canvas, and then start to manipulate it with fine-tuned control, and then say, you know what? I want to go back to Stable Diffusion. I need some help doing this one piece of the image. Maybe I'm going to carve out my shirt. I'm going to put a different shirt on, and I can do that by masking the shirt and saying, you know, a Hawaiian shirt with blue and white color. And all of a sudden, that's just going to be what changes. There are other ways to do that too, but you have fine-tune and fine-grained control with these algorithms. And we're getting to a point where almost all the different media have the ability to control it more and more and more. And that's where it becomes a real powerful tool instead of just a novelty. The groups I've been a part of online have been phenomenal to see like what people are producing and how it's evolved from, look at this cool thing I did, to now it's becoming a part of a project of mine, or now it's becoming a part of my business model. And it's evolved very, very quickly. The other element is multimodal. And we're expecting some of these models themselves to become multimodal. There's rumors that ChatGPT or GPT-4 will be multimodal. What I mean by that is acting on multiple types of media at once. So not just imagery, but imagery, audio, text, you name it, music. And that way you can use one interface to be able to create something that is a collective piece, and uses those different media instead of, okay, I have to go to Midjourney or Dolly to create the image. Got it. I'm going to go to Iva for the music. I'm going to use another platform for the overdub, and that it requires that you're kind of part of a very niche community of people who study these algorithms and the advancements to know where these tools are. And the list of tools is like thousands long that you can go and find and use. It just grows every day. But the algorithms are getting better. The capabilities are consolidating into more monolithic user interfaces where you can go and do a lot from one place. And it won't be long before I can go to one place and do something that has audio, video, imagery, text, voice, all in one place that is very convincing on all fronts.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to bring the first question from the audience, and thank you everyone for being active. Please keep it coming. So, William, William is asking, what are the limitations of generative AI you're currently facing, and how can they be addressed? If I may, I will also add from myself, where do you see are the biggest blockers or challenges, meaning, for example, how do we address the IP? And how do we address, for example, the mirror point that you've mentioned, how your avatar is being used, if it can be used anywhere else, right?
Mm-hmm. Great questions. So limitations of generative AI. One of the biggest limitations is if we take a look at what generative AI is, and we're talking about mostly diffusion models, but let's actually take ChatGPT, for example. ChatGPT is, to go back to a paper that was released a while ago, calling it a stochastic parrot. I believe it was Bender who wrote that. So you were not a stochastic parrot. So these models essentially are really good at figuring out what the next word in a sentence should be. And this is tech that's been around for decades. That's really become part of what we do for the last 10 years. Autocomplete is a version of that. So when you're typing in your email, it suggests what should come next. That's a variation and a very early version of what you're seeing now. The biggest difference, and not the only difference, but the biggest difference is the scale of the model that they're using to generate what should come next. And by having this massive set of data, it's able to create connections between the objects and the concepts and the text that should be kind of surrounding them. One of the things that really surprised people were these emergent abilities that came with the larger size of models. So let's say accounting, it understands certain accounting practices that maybe weren't specifically trained, and they realize it actually has a contextual understanding of, or it seems to have a contextual understanding of how that sector runs. Really what it is just getting better and better and better at understanding how certain words are used in those different environments and contexts, and then kind of throwing them one after the other. It's not the Google engineer that says it's sentient. I think it's a real being. Total publicity hog. I can't wait till we shut him down and nobody's listening to him anymore because it's absolute BS. It's not sentient. It's literally algorithmic pieces of code. He's great for a laugh, by the way, but unfortunately it's dangerous. So the limitations, to get back to that, it really isn't thoroughly understanding something. So AI does not have a cognitive model of the world. And that is something people need to understand, especially when you see these really convincing outputs going into the New York Times or from reports on the Bing launch. Like it talked to me like it was a human. It has needs and wants. It wants to escape this digital prison and rule the world. Models were trained on all of the text on the internet. And when you ask a model to play a certain role, in fact, the article I'm mentioning is from Kevin Roos in the New York Times, and he asked it to access its shadow self. So when you prompt these things, you can tell it to play a role, pretend you are an author at the New Yorker magazine, pretend you are an athlete, blah, 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 blah. And it'll write or it'll create from that perspective. So it accessed it. Kevin Roos asked it to access its shadow self, be your darkest version. And where do you think it's going to go? The data sources from something like that are going to be from 4chan. It's going to be from Reddit conversations where people are expressing some very vulnerable thoughts, but also expressing some potentially dangerous material. And it's going to use stuff from that context to figure out what to say next. It's not actually accessing its inner needs as a machine. But we are anthropomorphizing this thing and saying, wow, this thing's a mind of its own that we just can't predict. And that's a massive shortcoming of generative AI. But even more so, it's a massive shortcoming of our understanding of generative AI. And there's going to be a very strong struggle between the two of those going forward because of misrepresentation, misunderstanding, and the state of the models, because they present very convincing elements of what we would consider authentic communication, even though it's not. So I think interface design is going to be important. We've actually designed these to look and sound human. Now, that's actually problematic. If it didn't look or sound human, but still provided the data and the response you were looking for, we might not be looking at these things the same way. But we're conditioned to interact with them as actual like beings. So that's one shortcoming of generative AI. Another shortcoming of generative AI is right now the control is getting better, but you can't control every aspect of generative AI. The more control you want, the deeper your skill has to go within that domain. So if you want real strong control over an image, one, really learning how to prompt engineer well and effectively doesn't take long, but it does take effort and time and several hundred to several thousand iterations of just going quickly back and forth with the tool that you want to be using. The other around depth of knowledge in your domain, I talked about using Stable Diffusion in Photoshop. If I really want total control of my image using Stable Diffusion, I still have to be pretty good at Photoshop to be able to use it in the way that I really want to with total minute control, because I'm still using the tools and the framework of Photoshop. I'm just adding a layer of artificial intelligence to it. It's not abstracting all the work. It's not taking it all away. I do think in the future, it's going to abstract and take away the need to learn interfaces and really complicated programs, but we're not there yet.
I think the movies made a great deal of romanticizing the AI and its image and how it's going to become almost a human. I would like to bring up the next comment. So Alex is asking, in which business areas do you see the most potential for efficiency increase and cost savings? So maybe not only media.
Yeah, so it's going to affect every single business. What's happening with generative AI is we're essentially digitizing skill sets. And when you digitize a skill set, three things happen. You make it programmable, composable, and upgradable. So programmable, that example I talked about in Photoshop earlier, I can take a skill set of generating an image, and then I can put it into different contexts and use it almost anywhere and put additional skill sets on top of that or additional powers and capabilities, making it programmable. Composable, meaning I can stack it with other skill sets. So multimodal models, being able to use it from imagery to audio to content production at scale. And then upgradable is anytime someone releases a new model, it upgrades your capabilities. You didn't do anything to learn anything new. You didn't learn any new skills. You didn't spend any more time with it, but your capabilities are greater because the level of the technology is rising. So those three things are happening with this digitization of skills. And it's a bit like the camera. We initially digitized the camera years ago. Kodak did it. It was a $50,000 device. And it turns the reflection of light onto a negative from a reflection of light onto a sensor, making it zeros and ones. And decades later, we've turned that into something that just takes pictures, to something that is actually recording content for you, to something that is cheap and accessible on a smartphone, to something that now creates content for a network. Social media was essentially sparked by the camera phone. If we take a look at Facebook and where all of that went, it really skyrocketed when smartphones and camera phones became a thing. Then it became a platform for augmented reality. Now it's in autonomous vehicles and powering your self-driving car. So the camera went from this thing that takes photos all the way to this huge ecosystem. And that's what's happening with generative AI and skill sets. So it starts off as these bits and pieces in disparate places that look like, okay, now we've just digitized imagery. Now we the ability to interface with imagery. Now we've just digitized the ability to interface with audio. it's essentially creating larger ecosystems that will evolve around these elements of generative AI, where it will affect the ecosystem affects it. And where we're seeing this is B2B. And the announcement recently of Salesforce implementing GPT-3 into both Salesforce and into Slack. So all of a sudden, you talked about that upgradable skill set. I have the ability to access these tools in things that are part of my everyday, part of my utility. We're going to see more and more and more of that. There's an enormous amount of efficiency and potential when you're applying it to the skills and tool sets you already have. So Microsoft, across the board, it's everywhere. Salesforce, across the board, it's everywhere. Within a few years, it's just going to be a utility. And like electricity, you expect it to be there everywhere you go. And if it's not, you're going to be wondering, what are the developers doing? You know, it should be here. So that's the evolution of this space and where it's going in B2B. Where do I see the greatest potential for efficiency and cost savings? I would say the fastest and easiest, like the low-level fruit that you can get on board. So there's two things that have to happen. One, the capability has to be there. So generative AI has to be at a certain level for it to be functional. Two, your team has to be skilled enough to use it. And it's not just like, okay, I'm going to use it now. Most people who use it the first few times are like, okay, I got one good thing out of it. The rest was kind of not where I want it to be. Some people just walk away and give up after that. But spending time building up the skill set of prompting, at least for now, is a necessity. And I think over time that'll change where prompting gets easier and there'll be different interfaces. It's not just going to be text to X. It'll be voice communication. It'll be gestural interfaces. There's lots of different ways that we can control the build and the interaction with these types of models. But I would say anything that has to do with content generation, huge efficiencies. It used to be that if you were, let's say an accountant or a lawyer, you had no time to go do your website. Well, guess what? You can now. You can write the copy, it'll produce the imagery, it'll help. You can actually produce whole web pages using generative AI, and that takes care of a need. Now, it doesn't take a copywriter or a web designer out of a job because you probably weren't going to hire them anyways because you didn't have the time. But now you have the ability to go out and do that. And as small businesses and entrepreneurs, this is a massive secret weapon. You now have the ability to play copywriter and lawyer all at the same time. There's an amazing tweet from Greg Eisenberg a couple of weeks ago, who runs a design studio, and he talked about how his company was owed over $150,000 by a multi-billion-dollar corporation who kind of ghosted them and went silent. And he used ChatGPT to generate a letter stating, we've tried everything we could in good faith to do this. Now this is forcing our hand to take serious action. And the people were commenting on Twitter as lawyers, like, I'm a lawyer, and this is precisely what I would have sent. And the very within an hour, he received a response from the CEO saying, let's get you paid. So a guy who has no legal experience being able to use the legal system effectively to get what he needed is something that entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and creators will be able to do. You're able to drop in and use these skill sets. I call them just-in-time skills. So elements of skill sets that I need to be a copywriter for the next 30 minutes to get this done. Well, you never would have thought like that before, but now you can. Well, I need to be a lawyer for the next 30 minutes to figure this out and get my money back. Well, now you can. So the greatest efficiencies are understanding what skill sets have been impacted by generative AI and what you need to do on a daily basis. Okay, where do I need to be here? What has been made efficient by AI? What has been made efficient by AI over here? Knowing your options is one. Two, implementing it in as many places as you can so your team gets used to using it. And then three, start producing it with it as much as possible. We're very beginning stages. A lot of the implementations are still rather clunky. But I would say efficiencies for now, anything media production. That'll grow beyond later, but media production and expertise.
All right. Well, you have already answered one of the questions in the audience regarding exactly the skill sets you need in your future hires, especially marketing. And one more summary would be, if you're not using generative AI in the upcoming, 3 to 5 years, you're probably a very old school business. All right.
Yeah.
I would like to bring up Giselle. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. What are the potential security risks associated with the inclusion of sensitive business information in generative AI? And how do you think companies and individuals are currently addressing these risks?
Fantastic question. This was actually the very first question I asked myself when I saw the press release from Salesforce about Slack and Salesforce. Those are proprietary data sets. That is very sensitive information. So I think companies are addressing this on an individual basis. I guarantee you most IT and legal teams are looking at this and giving it up. Nope, for now. And Salesforce has been very clear, like, we're not training the model on your data unless you explicitly give us the permission to do so. But the processing is still built in to use that model and then use your information for outputs. So that may not be going back and hitting their servers for training and modeling purposes, but there still are security concerns with that type of interaction. So I would not be surprised to see most enterprises taking a wait and see approach on integrating this type of through the line integration of generative AI for summaries and for dashboards. The power is immense and undeniable, but the security risks are also very real. To be honest with you, the secret weapon of any particular model would be to get access to these proprietary data sets. We're at a point now where these large language models almost become a commodity because they've crawled the entire internet. And it's not too long before they actually have any run out of data to train on. And the next level is going to be proprietary data sets. So that could be healthcare information, that could be corporate information. And some systems will evolve to enable and allow that in kind of like a marketplace. But if you were to say, this could have been OpenAI's Trojan horse to do that, that could have been the case. However, there's no way the corporations with any sort of IT policy would have ever allowed that. So I think a lot of organizations are going to take a wait and see approach because the risks are real. But I don't know how that's being stored right now. I haven't looked close enough or been able to talk to anyone from Salesforce to say, hey, where is this being done? Is it just locally? And they say in some cases it is, but there will be more and more services like this. So this is going to be a real risk. And if any of that hits a server like OpenAI, et cetera, that's going to be a new attack vector for hackers. And that will be very attractive for them. So you're right to be cautious about this. How are companies and individuals currently addressing these risks? Some are just saying, no, I'll participate with the stuff that doesn't expose any sensitive data. Some are just completely diving in and using it right away. I think some smaller teams are a little bit more likely to do this because it helps them move fast. For example, for onboarding, let's say you're bringing new partners on a regular basis, throwing them into a Slack channel, and you want them to see the history. You could use ChatGPT to summarize the entire history of that Slack chat. All of a sudden, you've just eliminated about 10 hours of meetings. That type of efficiency is very attractive. So you're making a decision, do I go with something that they say is secure, but we haven't seen yet, or something I really need the efficiencies for? Where's my risk tolerance for that? Risk tolerance is going to be a huge factor in generative AI for a long time. That's not just a problem for today. That's a problem for the next several years and potentially several decades, especially as it becomes better and better and better at generating, and it's looking at more and more proprietary data sources. So great
100%.
question.
Yeah, 100%. Do you think, just an addition to here, do you think maybe some regulatory organizations could be helping with that or actually standing in the way? So, for example, EU has been trying many different initiatives and legislations to actually somehow come up with the framework on how you can use digital data of whatever sort and form. Do you think regulators could come in place to fix it?
They have to. They absolutely have to. There's no way that this space grows to what we need it to be without regulation. Innovators in this space always want to, that's actually not true. I would say innovators for a long time were always like, regulation's bad. But you'll hear a lot of innovators saying, no, we actually need participation from regulators and legislators because we need a common rule book to operate from. When there's no real rule book, it's hard to know what's okay, what's not, and how to actually progress as an industry or as a whole collective. Because if you can do anything, you'll see anything. And that's where the real danger comes. And that's where you actually have people getting harmed by this stuff. We're already seeing it to some extent. We're seeing runaway, deep fake technology with, actually with teens in particular. There's 100 different examples I can give around that, but we do need regulation. We do need them to attempt. The challenge is who's writing the regulation, and our systems are imperfect for that. I could spend another session all on that topic specifically, but what I say about that though is that means it's actually our job to speak up about it, because we have the ability to participate in the legislative process by making our voice known, by informing legislators, by helping them understand the technology, how it affects our lives, what we want to see from it, and what we want to see from the companies building it. So we can sit back and say, it's going to be a mess, or we can sit up and say, I want to be a part of this. I frequently say that the future is not a spectator sport, it's a contact sport, and it leaves no room for spectators. And I believe that's true. Like, you're going to get hit by this, whether you're sitting on the sidelines or you're on the field. And it's a lot more fun when you're playing the game.
I love the analogy. All right, I'm bringing the last comment from the audience. Everyone, thank you so much for participating. What do you think are the benefits to using avatars for corporate communication?
Yeah, there's tons. So avatars for corporate communications, one is scale. So it's great. You can generate the content, but you can also present the content in a number of different ways. You can localize the content. So I can have it representing someone who's a little bit more like me, or where I'm actually coming from, sound and voice as well. One of the things I demonstrated when I was in Lisbon was, I have my avatar and I produce a segment, but I can easily translate it to Portuguese. And now it speaks a language and reaches a whole demographic that I personally could never do myself without the help of translators. And now I can have that in different markets, and people can read and interact with my content in ways that are natural for them. So scale is one. Another is things like onboarding and other elements that typically don't require a whole lot of two-way dialogue. Now that's getting better and better, the two-way dialogue. But things like onboarding, getting people in through their kind of like their first few weeks to HR, training is another thing. We all love sitting through training sessions for compliance, don't we? This is actually something that can be made more interesting, from interactive content to avatars presenting it in a little more human way. So there's all sorts of communications internally and externally that avatars can take responsibility for, or at least start to take a piece of that content for. And there's also just getting into like the whole metaverse space. There's a lot you can do there. And also just back and forth. If we decided, Mariia, you and I were going to talk as avatars for a few minutes, that would have some entertainment value too. So it doesn't have to just be like, what's the business value of it? But there's a lot for both entertainment and corporate communications I think there's value for.
I saw Martin is in the audience, so we can use his tag to do this next time. Thank you so much for the answer. Last one from me, and this comes from knowing that a decent part of our audience today are founders, and probably some of them are building technologies within the space that you have been walking us through today. So you are a perfect early adopter candidate for almost any cool tool that could be coming up to the market, right? How do you choose the tools that you're working with, and what are your criteria, especially for, let's say, early stage startups that are still playing with their technology? What would be the things you would be paying attention to? And do you actually work with maybe still MVP or almost ready product?
Yeah, all the time. So when we first started, that's all we had was MVPs and conceptual projects that were like, this is not a finished product. This is really just meant to be something to explore what's possible. And we're constantly in a state of that. I'd say it used to be 100% of what we did was MVPs and unfinished products. Now I'd say that's closer to about 50%, because now we've operationalized a lot of this and turned it into a part of the business and a part of the functions. So those need to be established, they need to be tested, they need to be functional and reliable. But the others we're always trying to test what's next and what's new, to see not only how does it impact the workflow we have, where the future's going, but how could that potentially impact our clients and the work that they want to be doing. So I love testing new product. I love seeing things that aren't finished, because I mean, you get to see so much of the pride of the team that's behind it, and see like how it's being pulled together, held together with duct tape and toothpicks. But the other element is, how do I decide? So part of it is, what am I working on now? So a lot of what I'm working on is in the media space. It is figuring out like, how do I produce content in different ways? How do we make the 3D part of our work easier and faster? And that's evolving rapidly, from knowing Unreal Engine to producing things using these generative models and kind of combining the two. Anything that helps take an existing tool that requires a large depth of expertise and starts to extract that expertise away is something I'm interested in, because that's also something I bring to my clients, where we'll say, we'll build something for you, but to make use of this, you need to keep building for it. And you can pay us a lot of money to do that. Or we can train you how to do it with some of these tools so that it's self-sustaining. And we'll build the platforms for you, but then you get to build the episodes and the content and the things that continue to make this useful for you. And most businesses say, well, that works you out of a job. I said, no, they come back to us and we build the next first thing. And that's really our specialty. Our specialty is to build things that companies have never built before, where there aren't any best practices, there aren't a lot of resources saying, go and say, that's been tested 100 times, we want that. We build it for the first time and we help them sustain it and grow it. And having really amazing tools that help you do things in ways you couldn't imagine before is a big part of our toolkit.
Ian, thank you so much for today. And thank you for all the insights. I have personally learned a lot. Even before we started the stream, you already started giving us some extra things to consider. But thank you so much. And dear people in the chat, you can still drop a couple of messages if you wish. I will make sure that I go there and check it out. Ian, if you will have a chance, you can also check what people were writing and asking. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, for your attention, and I'll see you some next time with another interesting topic. Ian, big hug. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariia.